Hello and welcome to the Test, Optimize, and Scale podcast. It is a pleasure to have Ian Clifford with us today. CEO, board chair of FuelPositive, has been CEO since they've gone public in 2006. Ian, great to have you on. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Jason. How are you?
Good. And I know
Excellent.
you're logging in from Nova Scotia.
I am. Yeah, beautiful Nova Scotia. Just hit by a hurricane 2 weeks ago. I don't know what's happening to this world, but something is seriously messed up when hurricanes come ashore in beautiful Nova Scotia. It shouldn't be happening. Crazy.
Wow. Well, I hope you guys weren't affected too much, and I've been looking forward to today's discussions. Thought we'd begin with your background. Know you have different chapters, and thought we'd begin with your story.
Yeah, no, happy to give a brief synopsis. I don't want to use up all of our time talking about the past. I really want to focus on the future, of course. Started life as a photographer, in fact, and was involved with a great American photographer, Ansel Adams, when I was very young, and had the opportunity to learn a lot about environmentalism, working with Ansel as a young photographer, and that sort of informed me through my life in terms of my focus on environmentalism and the imperative to preserve and to improve on what we have. I took that career through a number of different iterations, ultimately starting an electric car company back in 2006. So this was ZENN Motor Company. So we were way ahead of the curve on certainly in that sector, but we focused on a very, very interesting energy storage technology, realizing that batteries are the most important thing in terms of massive global adoption of electric vehicles. So we actually still have a technology that we invested in back then that we're working with a group associated with NASA to commercialize. So that's sort of a little sidebar in terms of what we do on a daily basis. But a couple of years ago, became very, very interested in green ammonia as a fertilizer for farmers and as a chemical that's used in a whole bunch of different applications around the world. Invested in a technology last year that we're just in the process of commercializing. We'll have our first system on farm very early in 2023. So it's been a fascinating journey from starting out as a young photographer through to where we are today, and worked with amazing people along the way. We have just an absolutely brilliant team of people today. So I'm just very happy to be where we are today, and really, really looking forward to the future.
Absolutely. With that track record, it's what I imagine. And starting as a photographer, environmentalist, work with Ansel Adams, through multiple chapters of your own career growth, and building on those learnings, both ZENN Motor Company. I feel like I could ask you questions just around the NASA project and things like that, but want to be able to focus more on FuelPositive.
Sure.
What is the mission at FuelPositive? How has that evolved from 2006?
Well, right now we're in this place where we want to help transform agriculture around the world, and this is about feeding people and finding the most sustainable ways to do that. At the same time, reducing agriculture emissions dramatically around the world. So today, we're in a position where we were looking at the last century of how fertilizers were produced. And these are ammonia-based fertilizers, which are nitrogen fertilizers. And they've been produced in one of the most carbon-intense manufacturing processes on the planet, all tied to fossil fuels, produced in large, refinery-type situations, transported all around the world, massive carbon footprint. And we thought, this is just crazy. This is completely unsustainable. Farmers are facing, in the last year, quadrupling of pricing of inputs, fertilizer inputs. The whole issue around food security is huge for all of us as consumers, but also farmers trying to just make ends meet and keep a business going that will help feed the planet. So again, very much focused on how can we help one farm at a time make these fundamental changes. So that's what we're doing. We have a totally disruptive, decentralized model. We bring production of fertilizers right onto the farm. So farmers who have access to green electricity can produce green ammonia. And then they use that for fertilizing their crops. If they have the opportunity to put solar or wind on farm, they can lock in pricing and supply for decades. For a commodity that has had huge variability over the decades, we can give that type of security to farmers. So again, it's hugely disruptive, very, very exciting to farmers today who are facing like insane cost shifts and supply chain issues, and you name it, they're dealing with it, not to just mention climate change and weather and everything else that they're dealing with. So we can remove one of those incredible pressure points for farmers, and the response we're getting is fantastic. I mean, you can imagine farmers are clamoring to get this type of a solution on farm that will create fundamental change for them and fundamental change for us as consumers as well.
So you're cutting down the costs for the farmers and in the industry, of course, and then also the carbon footprint, massive impact on this versus the alternative. With your model, you're placing the systems at the end user site, so directly on the farm, and you were talking about how much of an impact this has on the environment, just getting it there in general. Yeah. So it's through that model that you're able to have that dramatic impact on the environment.
Exactly. And we're also helping farmers in terms of best practices. So nitrogen fertilizers, which come from gray ammonia, have a big either a nitrogen oxide or NOx emission issue as well. So we're helping develop systems to help farmers reduce emissions once they start using our product. So we don't necessarily make any money from that, but we are improving environmental consumption and the environmental footprint across as much of the spectrum as we can for farmers to help them, operate in the most efficient manner, but also in the lowest with the lowest environmental footprint. So again, very exciting. If farmers can improve their business dramatically and at the same time reduce emissions dramatically without any cost associated with that for them, then it's a win-win. So again, very much focused on a very holistic approach to fertilizer usage.
And what does adoption look like? How has growth occurred? Going back 15 years, I remember a much different world and less of a drive at times towards things such as reducing emissions and carbon footprint. The shift that's occurred in 2010, 2020, now here in 2022. How have you seen those shifts? How have you seen that growth occur in terms of adoption?
Well, it's really interesting because the farmers we talk to and that we explore their operations with, they don't tend to see themselves as environmentalists. They're not. They see themselves as business people and businesses. So if we can help them reduce cost and at the same time reduce their emissions footprint dramatically, then it's back to this idea of a win-win for them. And then adoption and becoming environmentally relevant, significantly relevant, is a painless process for them. So you can create environmentalists by making things easy, right? Making adoption easy, and as long as you can make it positive to their business model, then you're creating environmentalists without them even knowing that they're becoming environmentalists, which is a great thing. And farmers are amazing people, right? I mean, they're feeding the planet, and they have a really rough go of it when there's so much insecurity around their inputs and supply chain. It's dramatic. And of course, as I said earlier, with climate change, it's only getting more and more challenging. So if we can help them every step along the way, we will, and we are. And that, to me, that's just it makes us feel very good in the company to help at that level.
And do you have a lot of strategic partners? How has the reception been from the industry?
Well, we're selling to the end user, right? So we're eliminating supply chain. We are disrupting a 100-year-old industry. So our model is a direct sale to a farmer today, and that's our target. Our target market is our farmers today. So interestingly, we had asked our question going into this because we were really concerned that a farmer who would adopt a system like ours would be seen as an outsider or a pariah, or someone pushing change and that sort of thing. And we tested the market a lot in that context and realized, certainly with those who are kind of the early adopters, is they see themselves as heroes, right? They're creating a sustainable model for other farmers to embrace and to build upon. And this is what's so beautiful about, certainly from our perspective, a decentralized model where each farm becomes this independent operation that is so much less susceptible to the kind of pressures and variables that have existed forever for farmers. So that's quite remarkable. That's a remarkable change.
That's incredible to hear, and love we would call direct to consumer model for many of our campaigns. What is the bandwidth? What is the potential? How many ammonia synthesis systems will you have the capacity to make in years to come?
Well, that's a great question, because if we were just to keep up with the sort of compound annual growth rate within the commodity gray ammonia technology market today, or supply market today, that would amount to about 100,000 fuel positive systems per year. That's how quickly the market is growing, and the green ammonia market is targeting even more dramatic growth, sort of exponential growth, because green ammonia hasn't existed historically. So now there's this great opportunity to enter into create a new sector, if you will, within the world of nitrogen fertilizers. So, and nobody else, or very few, I should say, in the world are doing this small scale decentralized model, and we see the benefit of that on so many different levels. I think that now globally, due in a great way to the horrible war in Ukraine, everybody is seeing the vulnerability of supply chain disruption. COVID has done the same, of course. So I think there's a very new attitude globally in terms of how do we build security into our social network that didn't exist before. How vulnerable we are. And the only way, and the way that we're pushing, is through decentralization. So we're helping farmers not only have our systems on farm, but to have solar or wind power on farm, with the potential of getting off grid entirely for their most costly input, and then locking in low cost and full supply for decades, right? So we're taking this incredibly vulnerable commodity out of that reality for them, and we're saying, no, you can lock this in and you can build that level of security. So think about that, not only for their business but also for global food security as well. Like we're so vulnerable today, and we're seeing that, and we haven't even seen the kind of the tip of the iceberg, I don't think, in terms of what's going to happen to food costs in the coming next couple of years because of what's been happening in Ukraine, because Ukraine is one of the largest wheat producers in the world, and wheat, of course, is a core crop for so much of what we eat. So again, if Ukraine had thousands of our systems instead of a couple of big ammonia plants, we'd be in a very different situation today, right? That vulnerability, and if that kind of access existed around the world, again, stability, cost, food security, all of those things would resonate, and we would solve a lot of those insecurities
by having those essentially localized and with more efficient processes. And these are your systems. Do you guys have patents around this? I know you'd mentioned, green ammonia production, and other types of systems that are in place. How does that work? How does the FuelPositive's ownership of these processes live?
Yeah. So the core part of our system is a green ammonia synthesis technology that was developed in Canada by a group led by Dr. Ibrahim Dinser, who's a preeminent academic and scientist in both hydrogen and ammonia, based in Ontario Technology University, just outside of Toronto. So we acquired full rights to that technology in April of 2021, and we went to full non-provisional patent in June of 2022. So that's the core basis. Since that time, we're developing all sorts of supportive intellectual property around the system. There's a lot of different outputs that are relevant from our system that can be utilized in different types of agriculture, anything from controlled environment farming, vertical farming, greenhouse type applications, through to where our initial system will be, which is a 11,000 acre plant-based farm just outside of Winnipeg, Manitoba. So that's a big, a big part of our model, is to continue to build certainly our intellectual property portfolio around the core technology, but there's a lot of spin-off here, and there's a lot of vertical integration as well, because when you start talking about helping farmers get off grid, then you've got wind and solar technologies that are extremely relevant, energy storage technologies to help keep those systems running continually within an intermittent power supply. So again, lots to look at. And then the global applications, we started pre-sales a couple of months ago in August of 2022, and we're getting inquiries from all over the world. I mean, places I didn't think we'd even be touching for, the next 4 or 5 years are now showing tremendous interest, which again ties into the previous part of the conversation around food security, and realizing that this vulnerability, we've got to somehow create stability in a very unstable world in that context. So that's very exciting.
Absolutely. I mean, talk about the potential solutions. And as you said, we've barely scratched the surface in terms of food costs, logistics. We've seen what's possible in terms of obstacles that could occur in years to come, and how dependent we are on these current models. So to have it sustainable in the specific producer regions, to be able to have that security, and even just hearing about the other vertical integrations
Yeah.
when it comes to energy and storage and how to make everything off grid. Sounds like there's a lot more room for expansion as well as application of FuelPositive.
Absolutely. And the other thing that's really neat about about green ammonia that not a lot of people are aware of, it's also a very viable fossil fuel replacement. So one of the big issues in large grain farms, for instance, is crop drying. So these are these large furnaces that dry grain, and they're run by propane or natural gas, and again, huge consumers of energy. Green ammonia can be combusted and replace fossil fuels in that context. So this is another sort of really interesting kind of, we talked about sort of spin-off opportunities. So farmers who now, will spend many hundreds of thousands of dollars on fossil fuel to do that process could also be producing their own fuel on farm in a fuel positive system that would benefit greatly, reduce carbon emissions again dramatically. So there's a lot of incentive out there now to try to decarbonize agriculture on many different levels and move away from fossil fuels as much as possible. And this is another, standalone system that can produce a fuel replacement on farm. So that's pretty dramatic as well. And if you start thinking of the implications of that, then it's you can see why it's again very exciting to farmers around the world.
Is there a lot of competition in your market? Are there other groups doing what you do? I know you have your own tech, but what does that ecosystem look like?
Right now, it's quite limited. I told you what just keeping up with the growth, even just to keep up with the growth, it would be a massive amount of production for us. So there's a lot of room in this industry, in the green ammonia industry, for other players. I think we're very likely the first to market with a commercial system early in 2023. So a real on-farm operating system. So I think we'll have a first mover advantage there for sure. But it's an exciting space, and it's a space full of necessity, right? And we don't have a lot of time to fix emissions in agriculture, and we're deeply focused on that. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But we're excited by what we've got. Like I said, the pre-sales interest now is very similar, very significant rather globally. So our intentions are to scale up manufacturing quite significantly through 2023 and hopefully be in a position for mass production in 2024.
Beyond impressive, the impact you're having on the environment, what you're doing with your tech to be able to reduce costs for farmers, and the impact it has on the end consumers at that, and around potential disasters that could occur in the future. So really amazing to see everything that you've built. If you were to package some of the insights you've gathered throughout your career and be able to apply them, towards other founders and really showcase some of the values of FuelPositive, in that discussion, what would you recommend for other groups to do? What would you recommend for them to test? You guys have obviously done a lot of different analysis of your own, determining which routes to go down. What would you recommend for other founders to test towards their own growth?
Well, certainly mission and values. Like, make sure that, first of all, that what you're doing, you fundamentally believe in, that you're not stretching into areas where you don't have commitment. Because if you're not fully committed to what you're doing, you're not going to succeed. That's been certainly my experience, and other founders and entrepreneurs that I've worked with. If you're not genuinely engaged and believe what you're doing, it's never going to happen. Not effectively going to happen. So that's hugely important. Then for me, it's people. It's who you're working with. You're only as good as the people that you have with you, and we've worked so hard to build the greatest team. Again, hiring based on values and mission. So we make sure that the people that join the company are absolutely, again, committed to the objectives of us as a progressive organization. And that, again, very, very important. And then look at change on a real macro level. Like, what can you do with the world is certainly, if you're working in environmental change, things have got to happen, and they've got to happen quickly. So we're focused in and engaged in technologies that can be commercialized today, not decades from now. And we don't have decades. So if you're looking at something that's got a 20-year horizon, it may not be worth your effort, in the sense that we've got to get things done today that are going to make a huge impact. So then again, and that requires a team that can move, it's nimble, able to scale really, really fast, really, really effectively, and make sure you have a business model that makes sense as well. We're building and sourcing, and we're trying to reduce our supply chain as dramatically as we can, building in systems in Canada, using local material, local supply, so that we don't get into the vulnerability of relying on global supply chains, which we've seen over the last 3 years have just become so incredibly vulnerable and unpredictable, which is the worst part of it. So again, build local, think global. We're building in 20-foot containers. That's the footprint of our systems, for a very good reason, and that modularity is transportable around the world. So we can build systems in Canada and deploy them anywhere on the planet. And these are systems that have decade-long lifespans. So 20, 30 years of operation of our system is entirely expected. Hugely robust, very simple to operate. We can control them completely remotely as well. So we're making sure that our end users, our customers, our direct-to-farmer model and direct-to-industry model is very easy to adopt. So again, adoption is a really important part of the equation as well.
So really dial down your model, have a business plan that makes sense to be able to hit each of the goals, the roadmap, be fully committed, not going to succeed if you don't, have the right mission, the right culture, the right setup around it, and then bring in people. It all comes down to the people you're bringing into. Love how you pointed out, act local, think global, towards the greater impact. And I think this resonates across the board, even from what we do at agency level, but for the clients that we work with, seems to be very abundantly clear that this has been present throughout the course of the success and since going public in 2006. What about optimization? How do you optimize? How do you determine what's working best towards larger growth? How do you optimize if, let's say, it's not working right out of the gate? What are the best steps towards obstacles?
Well, again, we have a really horizontal structure within the organization. We are very attuned to the needs of everybody across the organization. And again, very, very important that we can respond quickly to challenges and adapt quickly to challenges, and make sure everyone has a very clear voice in terms of bringing things forward. So management of people, management of expectations, making sure that we've got a culture that is really, really progressive in terms of how we work together. Very, very important. Total open door policies, like there is no bad idea. I mean, they sound like cliches, but they're extremely effective when they're implemented effectively. And then when you do that, you can be extremely responsive to challenges. Like we've been building these first systems aggressively over the last year, and we're facing the same supply chain challenges that everyone manufacturing anything on the planet has today. But if you've got a nimble, smart team who's constantly doing contingency planning and so on, and is responsive in that way, you can move very, very quickly. You can realign very, very quickly. And it's companies that don't have that ability that I think are in the future, destined for failure because things are changing so fast now, and the ability to adapt quickly is essential.
Adapt quickly, have those findings, be nimble. I know that is a drastic differentiator from some of the largest corporations and all of the processes they have to go through to get anything approved, even why there's mergers and acquisitions at times, just to have those smaller groups that can be the quick movers. So being able to have that focus.
No, and you asked the question earlier around, what does the competitive landscape look like? You've got the top 4 or 5 major ammonia companies in the world that have been around for decades and decades and tied directly to the fossil fuel industry, talking about producing green ammonia. But they can't shift like that. They are so locked into a way of conducting their business and producing output that they just won't be able to do it. So it's young, nimble companies that are going to be able to fill this void. And it's very similar to what Tesla did, right? The automakers can make great electric cars, but to move those mechanisms, to move those infrastructures is not an overnight type activity. Whereas a clean sheet greenfield type company can come in and say, no, we're going to do it entirely differently. Like our model is completely disruptive, right? It is the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of producing a commodity that's been produced the same way for over a century. Right. And that again is finding your niche too. It's finding a business model that is truly disruptive, that can make that kind of fundamental change happen quickly. Because farmers want to change. Like they can't stand what's happening to them now. It's an awful situation. And the big manufacturers, they don't do anything. They just increase their costs, reduce supply, and report the largest quarterly earnings in their history as a result. And that's at whose expense? And at the front line is farmers, and at the end of the chain is us buying a loaf of bread for 3 times as much as it cost last year. And that doesn't make any sense. Like that's an absurdity, right? So again, that's why figuring out that disruptive nature of what you're doing, how to make fundamental change. If you can do that in big industries that have been doing the same thing the same way forever, and it's technology that can be easily adopted, then you can facilitate huge things. Things can change. One farmer becomes 2, becomes 10, becomes 100, becomes 1,000. It's exponential. And
once you find that place, you can be disruptive. Exactly as you're saying, one all the way up. In fact, speaking to that, and also to the larger corporations, what are the steps towards scale? How do you take on market share? How do you find this winning scenario? What is disruptive? It is affecting in a positive way a portion of your market, and now you're trying to take it to a larger stage. What are the steps towards scale?
Well, again, people, starting with the people who know how to scale. So we have a chief operating officer now who has scaled technology for the likes of Toyota and Tesla and large food production and that sort of thing. So moving to automation of production quickly with with those core skills within the company will be a fundamental piece of our success. We've got to be able to scale from, sort of batch built, hand built systems today to 1 to 2 systems a day a year from now. Like that's the level of scale that we think we're facing. And then you got to pay for it. So how is that going to happen? We're a public company. We raise money in the capital markets, obviously, but we're now getting a huge amount of interest, both federally and provincially across Canada. So the opportunity for the public sector to look at, and government sectors to look at how valuable is this for food security. You start looking at environmental security and food security. the investments that are being made today should be having long-term return. Our technology fits right into that. So we're expecting that we'll have, as we scale, we'll have the level of support that we need to scale in a non-dilutive way to build the company up dramatically and very, very quickly. So, and centering ourselves and our operations in Canada we think is a very, very good decision. We've got raw material availability. We've got incredibly skilled labor force. We've got a really positive environmental programs to help build this type of technology. And we've got a very strong push towards export as well. So I think all the pieces are there, and we're really excited about that dynamic.
Strategic positioning of the company. Yes. Yeah.
And the model, like it's one thing to just say you've got something that's disruptive, but how do you get there, right? It's one thing it's very easy to say that you think you've got something disruptive, but if you haven't kind of mapped out a route, it may never happen, right? So, but we think we have a great model. And farmers are great. They love to talk to each other. They want to kick the tires. They want to see it working. When they see one solution working, then 10 farmers will buy in, and then each of them will bring 10, and it becomes exponential in that context. And because they see themselves as heroes doing what they're doing, it's a really positive disruption, right? It's not. You're dismantling an antiquated way of doing things, which we have to do in so many ways on the planet to make, survival possible, sadly. But if you can dismantle a dinosaur industry and turn it into something progressive, then and sustainable, then I think, you've got something really meaningful.
Have to adapt. You've gone into great depths with us today, talking about all of the issues, the solutions towards those, how you're addressing optimization and scale throughout the process, and ultimately the impact it's going to have on the environment, the cost it's going to save for farmers, and what that means for food costs for end users.
Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, Ian, I really enjoying our discussion. Have more questions that I think may be suited for your site. Maybe any investors who are listening in, and I know you guys have a lot of information there. What are the best ways for listeners to get in contact with you if they'd like to continue the discussion or just get more information? And what are some final notes that you want to leave the audience with today?
FuelPositive.com is our website, and it's a very dynamic site, and there's a lot of information there, and we're just moving into deployment of the first commercial systems. So the visuals are going to get a lot more powerful in terms of what the systems look like and how they operate, and having it deployed on the farm will be very, very exciting. And we've got a lot of stakeholders who are anxiously waiting for that to happen. So that's good. I'm easy to reach. I'm Ian at FuelPositive.com. So any of your viewers are welcome to reach out to me directly or through our website and our various social media and so on. It's all there. And then, we're at this really, as a company, at this really, really pivotal point where we go from sort of conceptual development to early manufacturing to actual deployment, and that's, for me, that's where the real test starts, right? Like, do we perform as advertised? We expect we'll be outperforming our targets, which will be great, but it's a real commercial technology, and if it doesn't work, it's not going to happen. So we're absolutely thrilled with where we are today, the type of internal testing we're doing, third-party validation that's well underway on many of our major components and so on. It's all looking great. So we're again extremely excited about what the next year holds for us.
Absolutely, I'm excited to watch it and invite all listeners to get in touch. Love that Ian provided his email address directly, and we're going to be rooting on your growth here, Ian. Want to thank you for hopping in and taking time out of the day to join this discussion.
Great, thanks so much, Jason. Thanks for the time.
My pleasure. I want to thank listeners for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.